Back in part 1, we took a look at a comparison between a Boss 302 and a DZ302 in stock trim. Now let's find out what happens after we modify them. In this video, we'll take a look at modifications, both to the Boss 302 and the DZ302. Now today, because both those vehicles were worth so much money, everyone would restore them back to the original condition. But back in the day, they were just starting points to take a fast car and make it even faster. And let's face it, you're starting with either a small block Ford or a small block Chevy. Both good places to begin. So let's check out the modifications we made both to the Boss 302 and the DZ302. Now I know everyone wants me to continue with this Ford versus Chevy theme and find out how much both motors make with the exact same modifications. But the reality is, this isn't that test. We took different routes for both of them because guys would do different things for different applications. So with the Ford, we went a different route than we did with the Chevy. The Chevy got dual quads on a tunnel ramp. The Ford got new 3V CHI heads from Australia. Both cool, both work, different routes. When deciding on the modifications for both our Ford and our Chevy, basically I had one rule. Well, two rules. First of all, this wasn't going to be a shootout between the Ford and Chevy to see who could make more power. I was just showing what happens when we make modifications to a Ford and what happens when we make modifications to a Chevy. Both of them are good, both of them can make a lot of power. Now we took different routes with each one. On the Ford and the Chevy, I wanted to stay with the stock short block. As it turned out, we had to make minor modifications to both. On the Ford, we had to increase piston to valve clearance. And on the Chevy, I had to increase spark plug to dome clearance. Both minor modifications, but both of them work. So on the Ford, I went with 3V CHI heads. That's right, I replaced the factory Boss heads, which had a lot of power left in them, but I wanted to use an aftermarket aluminum head. So I went with the CHI heads, their matching CHI intake, both of which were ported, and then a healthy camshaft. We also upgraded the oiling system. I put a good pan, windage tray, the normal things you would do. Now we were going to rev this motor a little higher, so naturally we had a good spring package. We had a roller cam. In fact, I tried 2 different roller cams. Big carburetor, headers, the works. On the Chevy side, we went a different route. Different in terms of the induction system, certainly. Now I installed a tunnel ram with 2 4-barrels on it. Super cool stuff. But again, we upgraded the cylinder heads because we know the factory fuelie heads, not ideal on the Chevy. We replaced those with a set of aluminum AFR heads. A good choice for a small block Chevy. Like the Ford, big roller cam, different oiling system, we did everything we could. Let's check out how much power each of our modified motors make, starting with the Ford, then the Chevy. We'll start things out with our Boss 302, and before we can get to our modified version, we're going to start with our stock version. And you'll remember that our stock Boss 302 with the 750 Holley and the 1.7" long tube headers produced 374 horsepower and 324 foot-pounds of torque. And before we went crazy and started changing everything, we actually did a camshaft upgrade on this Boss. So I want to show you guys what happened after we upgraded the camshaft to something a little more modern than that factory camshaft. So we installed a Comp 282S, which was a Magnum cam, and it was a 528 lift, 236-degree duration. It was a single pattern and 110-degree lobe separation angle. And as you can see, compared to the factory Boss 302 cam, that cam upgrade, the Comp cam upgrade, which is a more modern design, improved the power output basically everywhere and picked up a ton of power everywhere. Equipped with that camshaft, our otherwise stock Boss 302 produced 403 horsepower, and peak torque was up to 341 foot-pounds of torque. And we like to see power gains from a camshaft, but even better than seeing like peak gains that we normally associate with a cam upgrade, it's nice to see power gains everywhere. And that's what you can get when you upgrade from the factory cam, even from a fairly performance-oriented camshaft like that solid flat tapping Boss 302 cam. So now that we've shown you what happens, and obviously those heads flow a ton, so now that we've shown you what happens when you combine a decent camshaft with those good Boss 302 heads, let's take a look at what happened when we kind of went crazy and started upgrading everything. After running our stock Boss 302 and then with the cam upgrade, it was time to get a little more serious. So what we did was basically strip everything down. We removed the factory intake manifold, the factory Boss cylinder heads, even though they had a ton of power left in them because they already flowed 275 CFM or so. So they had enough to support quite a bit of power. But I had something else in mind. I wanted to upgrade to a set of aluminum aftermarket heads. But while we had the thing apart, I also increased the, we had to clearance the pistons. We had to put more available piston to valve clearance because we were going to get pretty healthy on the camshaft. But we also upgraded the oiling system. So we installed a Moroso oil pan, a deep sump pan, and a louvered windage tray to help control windage. It always picks up power when you improve the oiling system. But to get things started, we installed a pretty healthy solid roller cam to replace that flat tappet cam. The comp cam had a 731/716 lift split, a 252/264 degree duration split, and a 107 degree lobe separation angle. So it was pretty tight. So you knew it was going to make good power. Now we also installed the CHI 3V heads, and these were the 208s because they had two different versions. They also had a bigger port version. Now these had a 219/174 valve package, and these things were given the once over by Bryce over at Dr. J, and these things ended up flowing 345 CFM, which is quite a bit and more than we needed really for our reasonably mild Boss 302 application. Now that was topped off with a CHI 3V single 4-barrel intake designed to accept a 4150, and we installed a 950 HP Holley on it. And like the heads, that intake was also given the once over by the guys at Dr. J. Now we got this thing all together and ran it first with a comp cam. So I'll go ahead and show you what happened after we got our modified Boss together with the aluminum 3V heads. So as you can see, and we started our pull pretty late because this was a big roller cam and stuff, so we weren't too concerned with what was going on down low. If you're going to build something like this, it's definitely going to be kind of a high RPM race deal, not a street car. So this thing made 520 horsepower, so we had increased the power output by quite a bit. I mean, compared to that cammed version, we were up 120 horsepower, and compared to the factory one, we were up even more. So it was a good gain, especially since we didn't really change the compression ratio so much. The chamber size was comparable to the factory Boss head, and we didn't increase it dramatically. So a set of really good pistons that would bring the compression up like, another full point, kind of like we had in the DZ302, would improve this power output quite a bit. Now actually we did gain some more power, but unfortunately I don't have the dynograph for it. We installed another camshaft from the guys at Cam Research Corps, the guys that out at MPG Heads. They do a real good job. And their cam was 721 lift, 724, and then 245/249 degree duration split, and an even tighter 102 degree lobe separation angle. And as it turned out, the combination liked that cam even more because this motor made 542 horsepower. So we were up by another 20 or 25 horsepower. So it was a good combination. But unfortunately, I can't find that dynograph. But know that we did that, and it responded well to that camshaft. It was actually a little bit smaller than the comp solid roller cam we use. So those are the gains offered, and that's what we did on our Boss 302. Good power gains, up to 545 with that Cam Research Corps cam. Good gains. Let's take a look at the DZ302. Now that we had run our Boss 302, we could turn our attention to the Chevy cam with the DZ302. So you'll remember in stock trim, this DZ302 produced 357 horsepower and 333 foot-pounds of torque. And like the Boss, we didn't do a cam upgrade on this one because we didn't really think we had too much cylinder head to play with here. So we kind of went hog wild on this one just all at once. So what we did was, like the Boss, we put a Moroso oil pan and windage tray on it, and that worked really good. And then a big roller cam from Comp, 256/260 at 50, 640/621 lift split, and a nice tight LSA at 107 degrees. We also replaced, obviously, the Fuelie heads, which were kind of the limiting factor for the DZ302. We installed a set of AFR 210 eliminator heads with the competition porting, and they flowed 311 CFM with a 208/16 valve package. Then we installed a nice single plane high-rise intake and even tried a couple of spacers. Now we ended up switching off to a tunnel ram intake with with two 750 Hollies on it, and that worked really well. And I'll get to show you what the difference is. Unfortunately, I can't find a picture of that, but I can show you what the power curve looks like. So here's our stock DZ302, and here's what happened after we upgraded. And it's important for me to note that after we put the AFR heads on, we we ran into a little situation where we had to index the spark plugs, because the dome on that 302 is pretty significant to allow the thing to 302 displacement to achieve 11-to-1 compression. So we actually had to notch the piston a little bit so that the spark plug would fit, and then we had to index the plug so it went in properly, so it wouldn't come in contact with that dome. So here's what happened after we installed our modifications. So a lot like the Boss 302, this thing exceeded 500 horsepower and ended up producing 518 horsepower. Torque was nice and flat here, right at about 400 foot-pounds of torque. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it was even at 400.0, which is doesn't happen very often when we're dyno testing. But now here's an interesting comparison. We replaced the single plane, the single 4-barrel intake, with an Edelbrock dual quad tunnel ram and a pair of 750s. And unfortunately, I don't have the picture of that. I can't find that. Now, we also tried a lot of things. We tried lightweight oil. We put Q16 in it. We tried adjusting the lash. I mean, we basically threw the kitchen sink at it. But here's what ended up happening. This is with the tunnel ram. Power output jumped all the way up to 545 horsepower. Torque was up everywhere too, which is not uncommon for a tunnel ram. Unlike a single plane, the tunnel ram has even runner lengths for all 8 cylinders, and the single plane just can't do that. So this thing picked up power basically everywhere. It's a good combination. You know, it depends on if you want a tunnel ram sticking out the hood, which looks cool. It can be problematic if you're driving in the rain and stuff, but like the Boss 302, our little DZ302 made good power, easily exceeded 500 horsepower, both with the single 4-barrel and with the tunnel ram. 545 with the tunnel ram. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what did you think about our test with the Boss 302 and the DZ302? Now, I know some of you guys are going to want the following. I wanted you to run both motors with the same heads and the same cam and the same intake manifold and see who makes more power. The reality is, if one's a Ford and one's a Chevy and we install the same components on it, they're going to make the same power. The dyno doesn't care whose name is on the motor. That's not a very good test. But I'll tell you why I like both of these tests and both of these motors. On a small block Ford, there's a ton of good cylinder heads for them. Lots of camshafts, lots of intakes. But on the cylinder head side, I tested like 30 sets of cylinder heads back in the day for Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords. On the Windsor side, there's a lot of good heads for them. But I like this one because it was unique. We used Cleveland heads. And not just a Cleveland head, a 3V CHI head and intake manifold. And that makes this combination unique. The fact that it also made good power, even better. And on the Chevy side, same thing. Lots of great cylinder heads, lots of camshafts, lots of intake manifolds for a small block Chevy. But on this combination, we used a tunnel ram. And not just a tunnel ram, we put a tunnel ram on a 302. Very common on a 350, 383, even a 406. You don't see many of them anymore on a 302. That's why I like this Ford and the Chevy. Cool stuff. Lots of good ways to make power. Here's 2 of them. I'm Richard Holder, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. I'll keep testing. Lots more stuff coming up.